Amen to that. That was very powerful. Great stuff. I remember Pastor Shane picked me up for the first time to come to church. There were 15 of us in a golf. Those were the days, right? Awesome stuff. Judges 17 verse 6 says this. It says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Basically, what this passage is basically saying that is there was no king in Israel to basically ensure that the laws of the Lord was being kept by the people. And because there was no king there and there was no law there, people did as they thought it was right for them. And that's basically what happened, is that when there is no law, the only law that people have is pleasure. Meaning that people will only do what pleases them. If it does not please them, they will not do it. And this passage basically tells us that the disaster that was happening at that time, it was simply because there was no king in Israel. And what it was basically saying there is that the purpose of the king in Israel at the time was to ensure that the laws of the Lord was basically kept. And if you think about it, in the society that we are living in today, people live according to their pleasure. They only do things as it pleases them. But the only problem with pleasure is that whatever pleases you will basically cause someone else. Or the result of pleasure is not always as we think of it out to be. I'll give you guys a quick example. I think last year, the stats came out last year about how many kids in school were actually pregnant. You know how many girls in school were actually pregnant? I think the youngest was like 10 years old or something like that. If you think about it, you think of that, and I read this passage again. In those days, there was no king in South Africa. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This week, I don't know if you guys know, there was a ridiculous news, a news story that was online. Basically, what happened is there is a man in the Western Cape that broke into a farm. He broke into a farm. There's a footage. He broke into a farm, broke into a barn, and basically abused a pregnant goat. I don't want to give more details. This was last week here in South Africa. And I'll read this passage again. In those days, there was no king. So people did as it was right in their own eyes. Meaning that people judge themselves. There's a lot of time that people will do something wrong, but they'll never admit that is wrong because they are happy with it. And if we read Deuteronomy 11 from verse 26 to 28, this is what Moses says. He says, see, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. Meaning there's a blessing and a curse. And then he explains the difference between the two. This is the difference between a cursed life and a blessed life. If you have to measure your life, whether you are blessed or not, this is the measurement that Moses said we need to use to determine whether we are blessed or not. Verse 27, the blessing, if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today. And he's basically saying that wherever the commandment of the Lord is kept, there is a blessing there. And when you read that passage from Judge 17, the job of the king was to ensure that there was blessing in the nation. By ensuring that the nation is keeping the laws of the Lord. Verse 28, he says, the curse if you disobey the commands of the Lord your God and turn from the way that I command you today by following other gods which you have not known. How do you follow another god? The only way that you follow another god is by not obeying the commandment of the Lord. And today is just the thing of analyzing ourselves. You know, it's Easter weekend, and we know today is the second day. It means the King of Kings, he's still in the grave. But today we know that the King of Kings rose again. And when I'll read this passage again in Judges 17, verse 6. In those days, there was no king. Who's the king of your life? Who is it that is establishing the commandment of the Lord in your life? Because if the commandment of the Lord is not there, then you are scheduled. You are scheduled to be just like everyone else. And Moses basically in this passage in Deuteronomy beforehand, he was talking to them about the land that they are going into. And he was telling them that the land that you are going into, they kill their children. In the lands that you are going into, they abuse animals, like the story I told you earlier on. In the lands that you go to, they kill each other. There is no boundaries. And he's saying that if you don't ensure that the commandment of the Lord is the boundary that you set for your life, there is nothing stopping you from being just like them. And what do they look like? They are murderers. They are abusive. There is corruption amongst them. And XYZs, long stories, variables function everywhere, and I ended up watching The Bachelor, right? But I watched the last episode. The last episode, like, you gotta watch this stuff, you get me? And there was this buff guy who was the bachelor. He was like, when I saw this guy, I'm like, yeesh, this is a man. You know what I'm talking about. The last episode, right, there was like 3 girls left. It wasn't the last episode. There was 3 girls left. And I think before that, they have a night where they can, I think they can spend the night together. And I don't know how people watch these things, man. Like, it's crazy. But he stands before 2, there were 3 of them, 2 women, and then they asked him the question, why is the 3rd woman not here? And then he replied to them, he says, the 3rd woman last night asked me to be truthful to her. So I told her that I slept with both of you guys. Right? So now the 2 women were standing there, and I think none of them thought that he slept with both of them. They thought that he only slept with them. You know what I'm saying? So now the news broke out. Now they're all crying. Makes no sense to me because this guy in the beginning is dating like 31 women. And, it's like hectic emotion all over the place. He broke my heart. I'm like, what? He broke your heart? Like, there was 31 of you. That's a broken heart already from the beginning. Do you understand what I'm saying? But it was so painful. And the guy ended up going to church. It was hectic. And he's sitting there alone. He's confessing. He's crying. This big guy is crying. Even Mika doesn't cry like that. It's like, he's finished. He's completed. He needed an encounter, that guy. You know what I'm saying? That's what he needed at the moment. But the guy was finished. It was crazy. And something hit me in that moment. God spoke to me. And he told me this. He says, we might not like, as Christians, we might not like the commandment of God. But when you keep the commandment of God, even sinners value you. Those women, they went in there, they are not believers, I don't know, but they are not, clearly, they didn't keep the commandment of the Lord. But they had an expectation of that man to keep the commandment of the Lord. What are you ensuring that you are keeping the commandment of the Lord? If there is no king in your life, if there is no king in your life, you will do as it pleases you. And when you do as it pleases you, at the end of the day, you'll want to come here to church when there's no one, and you sit there broken, waiting for an encounter, and we'll tell you encounter is in 2 months' time. But it's Easter, and we are celebrating the King of Kings. And you need to evaluate yourself. Is the King of Kings the king over your life? Amen.